following is a special presentation of WAAY 31 News. You're watching a WAAY 31 special presentation, Disaster at Dock B, Lives Remembered, Lessons Learned.
Approximately 12:40 this morning, 40 minutes after midnight, we received a call.
Guys, since we last spoke, I've been talking to emergency management.
A restaurant near the docks there off of Lake Gunnersville.
On right now. Now, officials tell me that
one of the scariest things that I've faced so far.
The sky was just orange.
Jackson County Park Marina, 1 year ago, in the middle of a cold January night, a small fire broke out aboard a houseboat, one of 35 boats tied up just feet apart from each other along Dock B.
Fire generally moves fast. This was much faster than that.
Within minutes, that small, smoldering fire grew to a raging inferno.
All the boats was on fire. I mean, you knew it was going to be bad when you got there. The loss of life was tremendous.
Today, there is no evidence a dock was ever here. Except for this concrete slab, which now ends at the shoreline, the original walkway down to the dock, all traces of Dock B are gone. Someone left a memorial here, a flower-covered cross on top of the old electrical panel that serviced the dock, but this is the only physical reminder of the tragedy that occurred here in the early morning hours of January 27th, 2020. 8 people lost their lives here. One man lost his entire family, his wife and 5 children. Tonight, we'll remember those lives lost. We'll hear from survivors of that horrible night. We'll talk to first responders who worked heroically to save lives here. Through the words of witnesses and investigators, we'll piece together what happened that night, what led up to the disaster at Dock B, and the lessons learned to hopefully see that something like this never happens again. Lake Gunnersville is home to at least a dozen marinas and thousands of boats. Houseboats are popular here. It's a lifestyle that brought Joe Miles to Jackson County Park with his wife, Annette, and their 5 kids. They lived year-round aboard 2 houseboats tied up at Dock B.
Usually families are closer. They love more and enjoy life more when you're on a small home. Instead of our kids out in trouble, they was usually on a kayak or fishing, or they enjoyed it.
The Dixie Delight was moored at the first covered slip on Dock B, and like all of the liveaboard boats, it was connected to power and water by electrical lines and pipes that ran the length of the 420-foot wooden dock. By all accounts, it had not moved from its spot for at least 10 years. WAAY 31 obtained a transcript of the interview the owner gave to investigators with the National Transportation Safety Board after the fire. He said at about 12:30 a.m. he woke up to the sound of popping and smoke coming from behind the boat's electrical panel. He tried to put the fire out with a small fire extinguisher. When that didn't work, he ran across the dock to a neighbor's boat for help. But it was too late. At 12:38 a.m., he called 911. Scottsboro police arrived at 12:45, and firefighters from station number 2, the closest to the marina, were right behind them.
I don't think any of us expected to see what we saw when we arrived.
Lieutenant Landon Baker, a 14-year veteran of the fire department, said the call came in from dispatch as a boat on fire.
Unreal when we saw what we were fixing to be faced with when we pulled up on scene. Because we realized at that point it wasn't a boat on fire, it was the whole dock.
In the minutes before firefighters arrived, the owner of the Dixie Delight ran to Joe Miles' boat to wake him up. Together, they tried to push the burning boat away from the dock, but they couldn't untie it. After so many years, the knots were too tight. By now, the fire was quickly engulfing the boat. Within seconds, the fire jumped to the boat next to it, and then the boat across from it. At that point, almost 20 people, including the Miles family, were out of their boats and on the dock. Mom, Annette, along with another woman, Amanda Foster, were trying to keep the kids calm. But their situation was quickly becoming desperate. The fire now completely blocked their path to shore. Scottsboro Fire Chief Gene Necklace got the alert at home that something big was happening at Jackson County Park Marina. While racing to the scene, his worst fears were confirmed, even miles away.
I mean, it almost looked like daylight over there. I've seen a lot of things and scared myself a few times in 20-something years, but that's one that you just couldn't even fathom something of that nature until it happened. So.
Not only were survivors unable to get off the dock, firefighters were all but powerless to put the fire out.
The fire origination, being on the inland side, really hampered our access, really hampered our ability to get to where we needed to be.
The wooden construction of the dock fueled the fire. As it burned, it became more unstable, more dangerous. The fire consumed boat after boat, feeding on the fiberglass shells and the fuel and furnishings inside them.
You had 30 boats in there, 35 boats in there, 5 or 6 feet apart. It's spreading from boat to boat pretty quick, and then each time it does that heat factor just increases exponentially.
By now, fire crews from neighboring communities were on their way, including the only fireboat nearby in Gunnersville, but it wouldn't make it in time. According to witnesses, all 420 feet of the dock and 35 boats were on fire within 15 minutes of that first call for help. The 17 trapped and panicked survivors had no time to lose. One man used a kayak to paddle to shore. Another says he suggested they all jump in the water and swim to safety. But Joe wouldn't risk his kids to the icy cold water.
What I had told them to start with is get all the kids, get everybody out of their boats to the end of the dock, and hoping maybe that'd give us time for the fire departments to help.
The now 16 survivors quickly cut loose 2 large boats, climbed aboard, and pushed them out. They used anything at hand, including folding chairs and cleaning brushes, to paddle a short distance into the lake. For a moment, they were safe. But only for a moment. Back on the burning dock, a series of events was playing out that would ultimately claim many of them.
I remember every single thing about that night.
Jackson County Emergency Management Agency Director Paul Smith was called because of the threat of hazardous material in the water.
As I rounded the corner there at about Wethington Park, I could see the flames, and I knew that we had much more than a boat sinking.
He pulled up on a hellish scene.
You know, propane tanks exploding, shooting up in the air like Roman candles, boats drifting out, and you'd notice the boats that were on fire that were drifting out was almost like a magnet. They'd float out and then they'd come together.
That's what happened to the 2 boats carrying the exhausted survivors.
And when the fire had come through to the end of the dock, it was just like a vacuum. It pulled the boat in.
WAAY 31 Chief Meteorologist Kate McKenna explains what was happening.
You know, a fire as large and as hot as the one burning along the dock would easily be enough to create its own wind environment, in the sense that the air surrounding the fire would be drawn in. That hot air is rising, drawing in the surrounding air, and that's enough force to move a boat that's floating freely on the water nearby.
Then unoccupied boats, now on fire, began drifting from the dock. One hit the vessels containing 4 survivors. All 4 men jumped overboard into the 41-degree water, which was also now littered with floating, burning debris. From the other boat, Joe Miles could see more boats on fire floating toward them. In a heroic effort to save his family, Joe jumped into the water and tried to push the burning boats away. He was badly burned in the process, and it was no use. Another burning boat collided with the boat loaded with his loved ones and the others, and in seconds, that boat too was on fire. Everyone quickly took cover in the cabin. One man managed to break open the forward hatch and escape onto the deck and jumped into the water. Several others followed, an older couple and the owner of the Dixie Delight. But Joe's family was trapped, and he was helpless to save them.
When we come back up, I heard my family screaming and for me to help them, and there wasn't time.
Joe's wife of 13 years perished in the fire, along with their 5 children.
Christopher Zane Long was 19. He was autistic, blind, tumors, brain tumors. He had a lot of problems. And then Riley Aniston Long was my daughter. And then Traden Dominic, he was 10. And Tested Damien was my 9-year-old. And then I had a pretty little daughter. She was 7. Her name was Desley Nicole Miles.
Amanda Foster, the other woman who had tried to comfort the children, also died aboard that boat. Her stepsister told us she died a hero.
How easy would it have been for her to jump off? I mean, she was a healthy individual. She could have jumped off fairly young and swam across, and saved herself, but she didn't. She would not leave those kids. And that's the one thing that keeps getting told to me over and over. She would not leave those kids.
Coming up, we'll hear from first responders who jumped into action to save those still in the water. They explained to us that even amongst all that chaos, some things worked in their favor as they rushed to save lives.
You're watching a WAAY 31 special presentation, Disaster at Dock B, Lives Remembered, Lessons Learned.
The fire that consumed Dock B had already killed 7 people. 9 survivors were now in the water, hundreds of feet from shore, slowly succumbing to hypothermia in the 41-degree lake. One of them was struggling to make it to shore not far from the nearby fuel dock, where Scottsboro Fire's Lieutenant Landon Baker was stationed, making sure it didn't explode.
At that point, he started yelling to me for help. Help me, help me.
A fundamental foundation of first responder training is the safety of the responders. Chief Nicholas says that applies whether you're driving an engine, running into a burning building, or jumping into 41-degree water.
You have to protect the responder, because if you don't, then you compound the problem. You take what was one emergency or somebody else's emergency, and now you've added to it.
But Lieutenant Baker didn't hesitate. He got permission from his battalion chief to go into the icy water, a potentially life-threatening decision.
And at that point, when somebody's yelling at you for help, there's no choice.
He stripped off his equipment, grabbed a life jacket, tied a rope around his waist, and jumped in.
I knew that it was going to be cold, but I didn't realize how cold it was actually going to be until I went under, and when I resurfaced, you couldn't really catch your breath. It was real hard to catch your breath and to breathe. It was so cold. It was just that initial shock. It was pretty bad.
Lieutenant Baker doesn't remember much about the man he rescued, couldn't pick out his face in a crowd.
I just remember getting to him and telling him I told him to grab a hold of the life jacket, and then as soon as I knew that he had a hold of it, and I had it wrapped around my arm, I hollered for my firefighter to start pulling the rope in and pull us back in.
So many first responders sprang into action that night. Robert Shook owns Scottsboro Gun and Pawn. Saving lives, well, he does that in his spare time. He's a 40-year volunteer with the Jackson County Rescue Squad. Sergeant Brian Aiken is a near 20-year veteran with the Scottsboro Police Department. He's worked with Shook many times. That night, Aiken was on patrol and received a call of a break-in at Shook's pawn shop. Shook says that was the first of many things that actually went right that night. It was a false alarm, but Shook still went down to meet Aiken at the shop to check it out.
Normally I put on a pair of pajama pants or something like that and go, but I got dressed. Why did I get dressed?
Both men believe God had a hand in helping them help others that night. While at the store, the call came over Aiken's radio that Dock B was on fire. Survivors were in the water, and they needed a boat, fast. The boat they needed was at Shook's Rescue Squad building. And because Shook and Aiken were already together, precious life-saving minutes were saved.
We knew what we had to do. We came over here, we got a truck, went over to the next building, got a boat, and we took out. I backed them in the water.
The boat was in the water in less than 9 minutes. On the way to the dock, Shook said a prayer, fearing a family he knew might be in danger.
When the alarm went off and we were talking, he said it was at the park. I said, well, I'll hope it's not Joe's boat. And it was Joe's boat.
Together, Shook and Aiken searched for survivors.
You knew it was going to be bad when you got there, but it was pretty frightening.
One survivor was hanging on to a burning boat, refusing to let go, yelling she couldn't swim.
We finally convinced her to let go just enough that Robert was able to make a pass by, and as you can see by the buoy here, we got close enough to that boat that we burnt a buoy off the side of the boat.
One by one, they pulled almost all of the survivors to safety, including Joe Miles. Shook didn't know it, but Joe had just about given up.
I recognized him. He didn't have his glasses, so he couldn't recognize me, but he knew the voice.
I knew I was going to die probably. Robert said my whole body had done went under, and he reached down and pulled me up. And I remember him calling me by name, but I couldn't tell who he was.
We got to Joe, all of this was, all you could see was his face sticking out of the water. Yeah. He said, I heard you call my name. And I reached and got him.
The memories and emotions for survivors and first responders are still fresh. Many of the witnesses and survivors we contacted just couldn't talk to us on camera, including Joe Miles, who lost the most that night. That's why you're hearing from him over the phone. Many of the first responders are still working through what they saw and heard.
It's very heart-wrenching. I mean, you think about those poor kids.
My hero, number one, is Robert Shook, but every one of them was just great people and done all they could. A lot of them beat themselves up, but none of them could have done any more than what they did.
There's a lot of good things about this job and helping people, and so many times we do help people and make a positive difference. And then when you hit something where you can't always make that positive difference, and then when it's on this this immense, you know, and it's when it's it hits you hard.
Shook thinks about the one drowning victim that night, the 8th victim, Yancey Roper, last seen jumping off one of the boats with his brother Tommy Jones and 2 other men. His brother talked to WAAY 31 last year.
Yancey had a big heart. He loved everybody. He worked hard, and he cared. He really did. He actually helped get the children on the boat, and we pushed the boat out. And then we went and pushed our boat out.
The one man that drowned, how did we miss him? What did we do? I mean, you have to second guess everything you do. That's how you get better at what you do.
Almost every agency that responded that night has made significant changes over the past year to how they respond to worst-case scenarios like this. Coming up after the break, you'll hear in their words the steps they're taking to make sure something like this never happens again.
You're watching a WAAY 31 special presentation, Disaster at Dock B, Lives Remembered, Lessons Learned.
Healing is a big part of this story. For most, if not all of these first responders, the disaster at Dock B was the worst experience of their professional lives. They see it when they close their eyes. They feel it when they hug their kids.
It was more than any of us wanted to see that day. I can't think of a single soul that that didn't affect.
Did you see grown men in tears? Or was
Absolutely, absolutely I did. You might be talking to one right now.
What helps everyone get through this is believing that some good will come out of it. There are definite lessons learned.
That's the nature of this work is, unfortunately, a lot of times we're a reactive service, and it takes a significant event to make you better for the next one.
Fires, of course, are going to happen at marinas again. The NTSB's lead investigator in the case says even when they do everything right, it doesn't take much to start a tragic sequence of events.
These marinas aren't facilities that are unique to Scottsboro, Alabama, or even the South. You know, they're up and down the east and west coast. There's thousands of these across the country, and this could have happened anywhere.
Experts in fire safety say there are ways to minimize the impact. Just a few miles upstream is the city of Scottsboro's marina at Goose Pond. Some safety features were built into these docks. There is no wood here, just metal and concrete. Above, what look like skylights are actually burnout panels. If a boat does catch on fire, the panels are designed to melt away quickly to allow the heat to escape. Other changes were made at Goose Pond after the fire at Jackson County Park. Goose Pond Park Manager Stephen Clark showed us.
We added more safety equipment to the docks. We added life rings, we added bells, sound signaling devices in the event of an emergency. We have sirens up on shore here that we can send off if we need to. Just something to alert the people that something's going on, wake people up.
They also require that all boats are fully operational.
If something happens and the owner is down here, they can start that boat up, cut the lines, or untie the boat and back it out of the slip. And we do require that. So, and that was one of the big issues at County Park.
EMA Director Paul Smith supervised the removal of the charred wreckage of Doc B's boats. What he saw was shocking.
They absolutely need to run. I mean, there were boats that came out of that water. They may have had running motors on them, but there were no propellers.
The NTSB ruled the fire at Doc B accidental. The investigator told WAAY 31, since so much evidence was destroyed in the fire, he relied heavily on witness statements. In their report, they did note, quote, contributing to the severity of the fire and loss of life were the county and marina's limited fire safety practices. Alabama's fire codes for covered docks and marinas were not applicable to Dock B because it was built before those codes were adopted. The NTSB report says the Jackson County Park Marina was missing several safety guidelines like annual electrical inspections, employee fire training, biannual fire drills, and a pre-fire plan.
You know, like many accidents we investigate, it's not the single factor that ultimately causes the fatalities or the ultimate tragedy. It's a sequence of smaller accidents that left unnoticed and can exacerbate the problem.
In his witness statement to investigators a year ago, the Jackson County Park manager, Carl Barnes, told federal investigators, quote, we're going to implement a fire protection plan. I'm going to go personally and make sure their boats run. But the marina's website still only states that boats need to be presentable. We tried asking Carl Barnes about whether any of his plans had been implemented. He refused to talk to us. But the Scottsboro Fire Department now has its own fire boat, so they can fight fires where they couldn't before.
We have it if we need it, so that's what it's about.
The disaster at Dock B was an almost unbelievable and tragic series of events. The 8 deaths leave a lasting scar on this small town. EMA Director Paul Smith says the best we can do is to see that their lives were not lost in vain.
Unfortunately, you have to have tragedy at some points for there to be some adjustments in your thinking and some different ways to do things and some thinking outside the box. You know, sometimes it takes that. There's never been a point in human history where we haven't learned from something we've all experienced.
A sentiment echoed by the NTSB's Marine Safety Director.
We learn from these accidents and we use them to build regulations that are smart and responsive.
Chief Necklace is taking these lessons to heart.
Would any of them made a difference in January? I don't know, but you know, all we can do now is what we think is the best to try to stop this from ever happening.
Joe Miles wants you to take something much more personal away from his unimaginable loss. Don't take anything for granted, especially the ones you love.
But I just hope people see that you're not promised tomorrow. You better love your kids and enjoy life with your family while you got it. I did, but I enjoyed my family.
Thank you for watching this special presentation of WAAY 31 News. For more than 60 years, North Alabama has turned to WAAY 31 for trusted news, weather, and information. Coverage you can count on air, online, on your phone. WAAY 31.